What a Catch podcast episode 3, themes and messaging. Today we're just going to be doing an audio log. I've got my water here with me, kind of ready to go. But first things that we're going to be delving into here are what are the novel's central themes and how they're introduced and how they develop throughout the story. And by far the most prevalent one within Catch-22 is bureaucracy. Either absolute power of bureaucracy or absurd bureaucracy. There's plenty of it within Catch-22. It's first introduced in Chapter 5 when Doc Danica... I apologize for my birds. They suck. No one likes them, but they're here to stay for right now. But Doc Danica, probably butchering it, but he introduces the clause Catch-22 to Yosarin in Chapter 5. It's here that Yosarin is informed while trying to be grounded from flying any more of his missions by claiming insanity, claiming to be crazy. In order for a pilot to be grounded, though, on the basis of being insane, the pilot must ask to be grounded. But any pilot who does ask to be grounded must be sane enough to fly, as sane people would never want to fly the bombing missions. This figurative clause is utilized in many situations throughout the book to deny an individual of their free will, their own choice. And every soldier's life is practically at the whims of the higher-ranking officers who don't seem to care in the slightest of how any of the soldiers end up. And basically all Yosarin and his squadron can do is try to bend the will of the bureaucracy, the illogical rules within it, to their benefit, whichever way they can. Not much they can do there besides just continue along. The second central theme is the inevitability of death, and that is a big one. Throughout the novel, we follow John Yosarin and his attempts to prolong his life and stop flying his bombing missions. And it's only mentioned later on in the book that what caused his want for this is Snowden's death. It's the catalyst for why Yosarin's goal of living forever is actually followed through. Basically, death follows Yosarin everywhere he goes in the book. Everyone around him just fades away and is either declared missing or dead. And it's this constant reminder of the deaths around him, like the dead man in his tent, for example. His name, Lieutenant Mudd. He gets there. He gets to Italy. In less than 2 hours, he's already sent away on a bombing mission where he dies. But this is before he can even check in with the base, so he was technically never there, and his belongings can't be moved out. And it's a constant reminder every time Yosarin goes to his tent that was another one of his individuals in the squadron that died. Apologies, I'm going to take a sip of my water. Delicious. But Yosarin is constantly imagining all these ways that he could die, and he's terrified of what this means, and how he can actually get through this war without being killed off before its conclusion. There is a positive in the end of him seeing this inevitability of death in himself, and it's that he laments every moment that he isn't spent cherishing those little moments of good in the world. And that's the core part of the book. Every time he's on base, he's wandering around, just taking in the scenery. he sees all these little moments. He sees the officers club, and he remembers those good moments and wants those to stay around. Now, the third theme that we're going to be following is religion or loss of faith. Since Yosarin is an atheist, he doesn't really have a religion or really faith. But it's here that you can see why. And the reason why is because he doesn't believe a good and omniscient God, would create all the suffering in the world that he's experienced. He's experienced so many hardships and turmoils throughout his time in the war, and witnesses so many of his companions die in tragic and unforeseeable ways. And he just can't believe that a God would create this many options of pain and suffering for him to endure. And the other person who is shown to lose his faith, his religion, is Chaplain Tapman. He's an Anabaptist who starts out faithful and pious, believing in this religion. But as the story goes on, he begins to doubt his faith, and seeing how the upper brass is treating everyone else and how careless they are with their lives degrades his sense of pride in his faithfulness and begins to doubt what he actually is there for. But what we're going to be going on to next is how these characters I've selected between Chaplain Tapman, John Yosarin, and Colonel Cathcart, reflect the themes and messaging I stated before. First off, we have Chaplain Tapman. He starts out timid and shy and doesn't even stand up to his own assistant, Corporal Whitcomb, but he still stays a close and loyal companion to Yosarin, and even is one of the last people who Yosarin sees before he flees. And Tapman transforms into a more assertive and defiant individual. I apologize for the birds. As he progresses through the story. And this changed into a more defiant individual starts when the Criminal Investigative Division comes down to Yosarin's squadron because they're convinced that it's Chaplain Tapman who's been intercepting majors letters and signing them under the pseudonym Washington Irvine or Irvine Washington. He's found guilty on all the charges suspected of him, which he doesn't know any of. Even the people charging him don't know what they are. They're hoping that he knows them so that he'll confess to them while they're interrogating him in the cellar. But he's eventually released and just simply given a warning that he'll be under a strict 24-hour-a-day surveillance for practically the rest of the war. And it's here where he begins to lose his faith in religion. And it's when he talks with Yosarin for the final time, he encourages him to flee the war. He encourages him to flee to Sweden to get out of this mess and to live his own life. And he decides to stay behind and make the lives of Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Korn as difficult as possible because of what they've done to the soldiers in Yosarin's squadron before. Now, the next person we're going to be going on to is John Yosarin. And Yosarin's main goal in the novel is to live forever or die trying. And I love that little quote that he has for him. It symbolizes him so perfectly. But this just captures how fed up he was with the war and the corruption within the military that cost all these lives around him. And, I mean, with his actions in the story, Yosarin is by all means a coward, but he does have a reason to be so. Yosarin flies all the missions. He does plenty to have him given a honorable discharge and be done with his tour in Italy. But every single time that he's about to reach the quota, Colonel Cathcart increases the requirement for an individual to be discharged, to get out of flying. And this happens multiple times throughout the story. And it's Yosarin's quote that really stuck with me. The enemy is anybody who's going to get you killed, no matter which side he is on. And that is emphasizing Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn's own disposition towards their soldiers. They are careless with them. They don't care what happens to them. They throw them into battle and expect results. And if someone dies while they're flying the missions, they couldn't care less. And Yosarin sees them as the enemies as well. But this just shows how little faith he had for the war anymore. And by the time he finally flees for Sweden, almost all of the people he's served with are either dead, missing, or corrupt from the bureaucracy, just like Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn. It was only Yosarin's explicit attempts at staying alive for as long as possible that allowed him to actually survive the war and desert the military. And he reflects everything. He reflects the inevitability of death, the bureaucracy, him fighting it, and his loss of faith in the upper echelons of the military. And now the final person I'm going to be going over is Colonel Cathcart. Colonel Cathcart is the main antagonist in Catch-22, and his whole goal is to become a general. He doesn't want to be a colonel anymore. He wants to be better than those around him. And he does everything he can to please his superiors so that he can get that. And this is done by repeatedly increasing those number of missions required to complete any of the pilots, any of the bombardiers, their tours of duty. And it's made so apparent in the book that no one likes him. No one likes Colonel Cathcart. He is the worst out of anyone in the book. And when Yosarin refuses to fly any more missions, Cathcart prepares to have him court-martialed. They're prepared to have him locked away or sent back home with a dishonorable discharge. But Colonel Corn sees past what Yosarin's trying to do. Yosarin's trying to get out of the war, so he's trying to get dishonorably discharged. And Colonel Corn instead recommends that Yosarin gets a medal and is required to stay for his actions of going back over and bombing the target for the second time. And Yosarin tries again. Yosarin tries again to get dishonorably discharged or to just leave when he's caught AWOL in Rome. And Cathcart tries to have him court-martialed again. And this just shows how little Colonel Cathcart cared for Yosarin as well. Both of them hated each other. And, Colonel Cathcart's only care in the entire novel is to basically appear better and more productive than his other officers. And this comes at the detriment of all his other soldiers by making things more strict and harsh on all the other individuals. Now, the two last things I want to touch on before I let you guys go is the author's background and how their life, how they speculated the novel's themes and messaging, and what kind of examples we could give for that. And Joseph Heller, it's clear as day why or how he was able to get his point across, and it's because he served in World War II as a bombardier in Italy, just like Yosarin. He is basically the base plate, I'd say, for Yosarin in the novel. And there's a stark contrast between them as Yosarin's experiences in the war compared to Heller's. Yosarin had it a lot worse off. Heller stated that he didn't experience many dangerous missions and generally enjoyed his time in the military with the people around him. But when he did have those dangerous missions, people died, people got hurt, it was gruesome, it was bloody. When he did have those missions, he experienced the senseless bureaucracy of everything and witnessed the first-hand deadly nature and oppressiveness of that bureaucratic system. The sending in to the pointless missions and senseless death that followed is what motivated him to create these themes for the book and to write the story. And he represents this through the bleak portrayal of war and the abrupt deaths that came about through those missions. And when he was asked about Yosarin, he stated, quote, "Everyone in my book accuses everyone else of being crazy. Frankly, I think the whole society is nuts. And the question is, what does a sane man do in a society that's insane?" End quote. And it's this quote that clearly shows his intentions for the book. If you were to put yourself in the shoes of Yosarin, you would go insane too. That is the point he's trying to get across to his audience. Now, the final thing we're going to be going over is what the overall impact of the novel's message had on the readers and if it's still relevant today and would still resonate with the readers. And I personally think it could. It seriously could. But the novel's made to be anti-war. That's clear as day. The gruesome scenery, the bleak deaths, the senseless deaths, all of it. That's... I'm sorry about the birds. They are the worst. Apologies. The novel is made to have an anti-war perspective and have the reader understand the desperation that many felt during the war and as they tried to survive to the end of it. And with my own desires, my own ambitions to join the Marines, it was quite interesting to see how other people, how individuals in the book viewed the war and how they went about their missions and how they tried to get out of them. But with recent events in the world, I think we all know what that's talking about, and the heated tensions between some of the most powerful governmental bodies that have existed yet, I would definitely say that the book would still leave an impact on people, get its message across. People might not understand it just yet, but once things start getting more heated again, even more so than they already are in the world, people will come back to this book and understand its message. But I want to thank everyone for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode of What a Catch.